I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you about some concepts and ideas that can change your life and improve the quality of it. Our fellowship is a New Thought church, and a lot of people have misconceptions and don't necessarily understand what New Thought is. But I'd like to share with you in the next few minutes a few of the basic concepts of New Thought and talk about how New Thought is well integrated into traditional Christian thought. Most of us came from traditional backgrounds, from Protestant or Catholic churches, and so our theological ideas and our ideas about church and religion come from that background. There are three basic underlying principles that New Thought embraces, and certainly our church is a major part of that movement and teaches these three principles as fundamental to understanding spiritual truths and empowering our people so that the quality of their life is both confident and fulfilling. The first principle is that God and we are one. The second principle is that we should live in the now. The third principle is that we should live love. All of the other teachings that we have are encapsulated in these three gems of truth. And I'd like to just review with you what our thoughts are on these three dynamic principles and invite you to consider them for your own thoughts and in your own religious life. I want to say at the outset that we're not talking about your changing your religion. We're not talking about your changing your church or your faith. We're not talking about anything that has to do with dogma or creed. What we're talking about is inviting you to come to a spiritual thought that is open to maybe a new way of thinking than you've had in the past, and to have that thought process together with the process that you have and the belief system that you have today or that you've had as you've grown up. The first belief system or the first principle, God and we are one. That is a tremendously different view than the traditional Christian view. Traditional Christianity teaches us that God is in heaven, God is above us, and that God is a separate being from us. One of the things that we believe, not only about ourselves, those who are in our churches and centers, but we believe about all people, is that God and we are one. What that means simply is that the presence of God, and it doesn't even have to be that we call him God, the presence of the divine principle, the presence of that creative force that brought us into being, that is within every one of us. It's within the best person, it's within the worst person. It's within the saint, and it's within the worst sinner. The presence of God is with us always. We believe that as we move through the experience of life, that our ideas change about where God is, but God's presence doesn't change. The second principle is that we should live in the now. That sounds very simple, but it's very fundamental to the process of having a fulfilled and confident life, because most of us do not live in the now, in this present moment. Most of us live in the past or in the future. Most of us spend very little time in the now. As a matter of fact, as I'm talking to you, I am only semi-conscious. I appear to be conscious, but as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking ahead to what I want to share with you next. When I step out of this very moment and begin to think about a second, a minute, an hour, a day, a year from now, I step out of the present moment. Anytime we think about the things in the past, we step out of the present moment. Because of that, almost all of us, almost all of the time, are either semi-conscious or totally unconscious. We're able to function, we're able to go about our business, we're able to deal with our families and our jobs, we're even able to drive. And for any of you who drive, you can relate to this. Most of the people who are driving cars today, and at any given time, are semi or unconscious. The reason I say that is that the people driving the cars are thinking about other things. You do the same thing. I do the same thing. We get in our car, we start the engine, and we go wherever it is that we're going. On the way, we think about where we're going, how we're going, what we did yesterday, what we're going to do tonight, and our mind continues to go on and on and on. The same process takes place every Sunday in our church. People sit in the pews, I stand in the front, vocalists come, musicians perform, and in the midst of all that's going on, very few of us are able to be in the present moment, because we are only in the present moment, when we are not in the future and we are not in the past. How do we go about that process? Well, we go about the process of being in the now, in the present moment, by changing the way that we think about the things that go on. What that means is that when you talk to your spouse, or you talk to a coworker, or you talk to a friend, that you need to be focused on that very moment. And if you're not focused on that very moment, if you don't put your pencil down, put down whatever it is you're doing, look at that person and be with that person and experience the moment, you're somewhere else. And when you compound that fact by the reality that the person that you're talking to, unless they are conscious at that moment and are consciously talking to you and with you, they're not in the present moment. There's nothing that we can do about the past except to change the way that we think about it. There's nothing that we can really do about the future except to plan for it. And both of those things are very necessary. We need our memories, we need our thoughts, and we need the combined resources of what has brought us from the past into this present moment. We also need to plan what we're going to eat and how we're going to get from place to place and what we're going to do. But those things are secondary to what is taking place in the very present moment, in the now. And unless we're in the now, we'll go through all of our life experiences and we'll miss them. We'll go through every experience that we have that is truly meaningful and truly important, and we'll miss them. The other thing that'll happen is, unless we grasp the moment of the now and claim the reality of God's presence in us and with us, we can never truly be fulfilled and empowered and strengthened, because we're always somewhere else, and that's not where we need to be. The third principle is living love, and that sounds very easy. It sounds like something that we all believe. It is the foundation of many religious teachings and thoughts. What we believe about love is that our loving nature, our caring nature, that part of us that expresses love, is not called to express love in lovable circumstances and situations, but is called to experience love in the midst of the negative experiences of life, the unhappy experiences of life. It has to do with touching the untouchables, giving thanks for the things that we have in our lives, and loving the unlovable things, people, and experiences that we have. If we take these three principles and apply them to our daily lives, we can do that with the same face structure that we have. We can do that with the background that we have experienced in our lives. But we take on a new dimension of thinking. We start by taking on a new dimension of how we think about God. We then move into a new dimension of how we think about our daily lives and our expression of life by being in the now. And third, we enfold that entire those first two concepts, in one of love that is creative and balancing and brings us great joy and happiness. I don't know what you face in life, but I know that you and all of us have challenges and difficulties. There are jobs that are lost. There are times when we don't have enough money to pay the bills. There are illnesses that come into our lives. There are disappointments of our own making and disappointments that are a part of those whom we love. But by embracing these concepts, these three basic concepts, we're able to deal with the circumstances and situations that happen to us in a much more creative way. And we're able to channel the creative power of our thought into what it is we are going to get from the experiences. And what we want to get from the experience is to be at peace, centered, and happy in the midst of whatever happens in our lives. If you begin with this concept of giving up the idea that God is outside of you and accept the fact that God is in you, and if you accept that not only for yourself but for all people, God takes on a new dimension, because that divine presence is always a resource. And that magnificent resource can strengthen and empower you to new ways of thinking and living and acting. If you move into the experience of being in the present moment, you are always in the midst of where you are, and you can much more effectively deal with what's going on in your life. If you're in the present moment, it may be a moment of pain, it may be a moment of difficulty, or it may be a moment of great joy, but in the presence of that moment, you have the ability to experience it and to absorb and learn from it. And then, with a loving nature and consciousness, you're able to accept all of the things that take place in your life. We believe that all of the dogmas and all of the creeds and all of the religious faith of the world is wonderful and magnificent and does great things. But we believe that these three principles, accepted and ingrained in mind and life, can empower and strengthen everyone to a new way of life. And it doesn't require anyone changing their faith. It doesn't require anyone going to a new church. It doesn't require hard study or something after which you have to seek. It is a simple transformation that can take place and allow you to be where you are, to experience what you choose to experience, and to be a happy and fulfilled person. And so I would submit to you that New Thought does have a message for you, regardless of your background, and that it's nothing ominous or terrible. It's nothing that attacks that which is conventional and dear to your heart, but it is a religious and philosophical belief system that takes these three principles and invites everyone within the movement and around the world to embrace these three principles and concepts and to make their lives more fulfilling. And I invite you to use those three principles: accept that God and we are one, all of us, that we live in the present moment, in the moment of the now, and that we commit ourselves to living out love, especially for the unlovable things that we see and experience in life. We'd like to invite you to pause for a few moments with us now for a reflection and a prayer. We believe in prayer. We think it is a dynamic power that is both the spoken word and the thought of the mind. And so we invite you now to share with us in this time of prayer. Eternal God, we give you great thanks for all of the changes that are taking place upon planet Earth, all of the new and emerging nations, all of those people who are called to lead their people in new and magnificent ways. And as we join our hearts and minds in a collective prayer and vibration of peace and harmony, we send a ribbon of peace, a ribbon of harmony into all of the regions of the world where there is discontent, inharmony, and strife. We send that ribbon of peace into all of the homes and communities where there is a need for healing. And as we send that ribbon and vibration, we claim that healing and peace for ourselves and for all people. And we pray these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, and in the name of love. Amen.
That was a very riveting thought, wonderful talk. And could you elaborate? God and I are one. I think that is it's such a big thought. The fundamentalist churches do indeed teach very often that God is out there somewhere and he's looking down on us. He's the Father. Some people pray Father, Mother, God, Spirit. Mm-hmm. They pray in all different ways, but the fact that God is indeed within us.
Right. I think that is an empowering principle of New Thought, and certainly a foundation teaching that we have. And we even go a step further. We affirm that God and I are one when we're talking in private prayer. But in the churches, we say God and we are one, because we think that it's important at this point in time for us to acknowledge that it's not only that God is with and in us, that God is with and in everyone on the planet. And it doesn't require any acknowledgement of his presence. It doesn't require any kind of unity with him or with that power. That's there, and we acknowledge it. And because of that divine reality is within us all of us, from the Pentecostal to the atheist and everything in between, and those who have no faith. And that's certainly an empowering thought.
I know, and the principle works the same regardless of what we believe, because the principle is there and it works. I remember many, many, many years ago, I read that a good analogy would be electricity, and God is like the generator, and each individual is like the electric light, mm-hmm. or the electric refrigerator or stove or whatever modality the electricity is using. And I think that's a good analogy of what you just said.
It is, that power coming constantly to us. And I think it's important to note that when we say God and we are one, we're saying that we can never be separated from God, mm-hmm. that nothing that we do or say or any kind of behavior can separate us from God. We separate ourselves because we think we're separated. And we believe in reconciliation and the need for reconciliation, but not because God is separate from us, but because some of us have chosen to believe that we're separate from that divine presence. So we teach people and encourage people to believe in reconciliation if they believe they're alienated from God, even though in our mind we know they're not. We
Yes.
can see them, and we know God's in them, and in the worst of people as well.
Yes.
So,
Thank you. There's thought that reality is not really, that we're not really here. And when you were talking about living in the now, it reminded me of that. I have another friend who's a minister who teaches that she so often says, and it confuses people, that they are not really here. Reality, what we experience on earth is not really reality. The only reality is on the inner planes.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in New Thought, probably that tradition is best espoused in Christian Science. Mary Baker Eddy's non-reality of matter. We believe that matter is real, but it's not the ultimate reality. So the things that we see and experience in life, we believe they exist. If someone has cancer, we believe they have cancer. But we believe that the divine principle of life can empower and strengthen them, and that cancer may indeed invade their body, but it doesn't touch them. And sometimes there'll be a physical healing, but other times there isn't. But that's not important, because the reality, the ultimate reality is that they can't get cancer. But the physical reality is that the body can get cancer. And then how the spiritual being responds to that physical experience is what determines the outpicturing of life.
That's like that we have seven, not only a physical and spiritual body, but we have seven bodies, and the higher spiritual bodies are always pure, always whole, and always at one with God. Is that the idea?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we do have a physical body, and that physical body deteriorates. And I think in the deterioration of the physical body, God's telling us something, and that is, don't get too attached to it.
And also the continuity of life.
Exactly.
It's just the continuity of life. Paramahansa Yogananda went so far as to say, I was reading just this morning in something, that he never celebrated his birthdays until he was like in his past 50 or something like that, because he felt that he didn't indeed have physical birthdays, because he was not really here in that physical body. That wasn't himself.
Exactly, that he was more.
Right.
And of course, as people, many people grow older and their physical bodies deteriorate, or some people who are not old, as their physical bodies deteriorate because of disease, they'll most often say to us in counseling, I really can't believe that this is me, because I don't feel that I'm 85, or I don't feel that I'm as sick as I am. And that's because they're not, because that spiritual reality is within them.
So they're living from the higher spiritual body.
Exactly.
And that's really good. The creative force within us, could you elaborate on that? The creative force within us, the God force, that I know you've said a great deal about it, but I just think it's so important that every person realizes that this God force is within himself or herself.
Exactly. The kernel of divinity was planted from the beginning of time within each one of us. And that kernel of divinity is always growing, always coming forth. In the Western world and in the Christian world, we've come to think of it as the Christ. And we talk often in our church about the indwelling Christ. And but whatever the name is, the name's not important. Whatever the name not being important, the power within us, and acknowledging that it resides within us, and that it is creative, and that it is creating after its own kind. And because it's creating after its own kind, it is creating the same way that God creates, because as God's children, we are created in that image and with those same abilities. And so we are creating through the divine force and power within us, and we are creating a more illumined and balanced and healthy and whole and fulfilling life, not only in the physical, but in the spiritual. And what we're invited to do is to take that into the physical, and do that through the changing of our thought processes and through the positive affirmations that we have, and allow that life force to not only strengthen our spirit, but to strengthen and keep our bodies happy and healthy and whole for as long as we need them.
Then if we consciously stay attuned to God the whole, we're more apt to have a healthier body and live a more fulfilling life. And so it takes energy and power on our part to really attune ourselves. It doesn't just happen?
It does just happen if we could get out of the way. But so often we don't get out of the way. And so we're willing to, instead of getting out of the way and letting the power of God become manifest in our lives, through our thoughts, words and thoughts have molding power, so let us careful be. So we think thoughts that create experiences, and we have to experience them. But it is a natural process that we are strengthened, we are empowered, and that our needs will be met. Now, that doesn't mean that those needs, physical needs, will be met in the way we think they will. And we need to be real clear about that. When we talk about healing, we're not talking about curing. We think often about healing as curing.
Not necessarily,
It's not necessarily so, exactly. And so we are healed. We may not be cured, but we may be cured. And whether we're cured of the disease or not, our mission as children of God is to not allow that physical experience to touch us, but to go through it and to grow through it. And whatever the outcome is, it's all right. Because after all, we're more than the body anyway.
I think Mother Teresa has taught that to a multitude of people in a very viable way. And for myself, I find that meditation helps me keep centered best of all. And I teach that, as you know, very well. What suggestions would you make to people from your own personal viewpoint?
Well, I think meditation and prayer certainly are a fundamental part of building the spiritual person. And without that, it's very difficult until people come to a point of very deep spiritual understanding. And even at that point, their need and desire for prayer and meditation enlarges, because the more spiritual we become, the more detached we choose to become from the physical. And that's not to say that we should all run off to a monastery or go up on a mountaintop, because most of us are not called to do that. We're called to be in this physical experience, to work and to live and to be prosperous, successful, fulfilled children of God, and to be examples of that.
So we can't cop out. We have to stay right here and do the work.
We can't cop out.
As it comes to us.
If we do cop out, we simply get another chance. And so we'll do it again until we get it right. So. What do you do in your meditations?
Well, I have, to me, meditation is just centering and tuning in to God and to the divine force. And so it's, you were talking about centering as being the second primary force. And that to me is what we do. Prayer is talking to God, and meditation is listening to God. And so when we center ourselves, it's just being quiet enough to get our own self out of the way. And I think that's what you were saying earlier.
Very difficult in our tradition, because most people who have come from traditional religious backgrounds, Judeo-Christian backgrounds, prayer life is very structured. And prayer life is a process, as you say, of talking to God. We do well with recitation of prayers. We do well sometimes with spontaneous prayer. But the idea of centering ourselves and being quiet and letting God speak to us is a very dynamic tool for enhancing our spirituality. And I would really encourage people to do that, because if they're able to set aside time that's quiet to center themselves and to listen to God, God will speak. And the greatest and loudest way that God will speak is to bring peace. I mean, if nothing else, sitting in quiet solitude can bring peace of mind and body and spirit. And we know that it helps on the physical level too, with lowering blood pressure and stress level.
Exactly. That's been proven over and over. At the Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach, they discovered that 30 seconds of meditation changes the level of the body chemistry, just 30 seconds. And being quiet is not, it's being quiet within. I was prompted to say that when you were talking about the quietness, so many people think when they go into meditation, they have to have total quiet from around them physically in their environment, but that's not the point. The point is to be quiet within that individual, to be quiet, because you can meditate when clanging is going on from all different kinds of sources.
Absolutely. And the goal, too, is to get to a point where, as Paul said, we pray always, or we meditate always, so that in the midst of every circumstance or situation, we're able to draw upon that peace that we have. And so in the most stressful times of our lives, is when we need to draw upon the meditative presence of God and the centering of God's presence within us. I do that many times in the course of a day, and it brings strength and peace before things happen. And then in the midst of strife, conflict, arguments, disappointments, that's a time when we need to be able to sit, even if we're around a conference table or with a large number of people, and draw ourselves into the centered presence of being with God and knowing that God is speaking to our heart and bringing us peace, and claim that peace.
That's very, that's so important that we remember to just be silent, to just be.
To just be.
To just be.
To be in the present moment. That's a challenge
Yes.
in and of itself, because we know how busy our minds are and how dynamic our mind action is.
Yes.
So we have that opportunity to be in the now.
We work through situations. I know my daughter, who died in 1955, had been gone for some time before I could collect myself enough to, a poem came to me, and it was, I wish that I had been more calm, that I had learned to simply be instead of so much being when you were here with me. And I always have remembered that. That came to me many years ago. She died in 1955, but it has held me in good stead.
Very important,
Yes.
and especially in a difficult time like that.
Yes.
To be centered in the
Or to be,
present.
or for all time. It's good for all time, because just to simply be is so much, is so important.
So important.
It is so easy, but we think it's so hard.
We think it's hard. And so we've been in the present moment with you, and we've experienced this time, and our goal is not to change anything about your life except the way that you think, and to invite you to a new way of thought. And we wish you the very best in this process, and we invite you to be with us in the future as we talk about new thoughts and new ways of living in a confident way.